Okay, I think that we're recording. Welcome to episode 3 and the first episode where I'm actually having a guest on my show. Today we have with us the lovely, the talented, the beautiful Ashraf Sewailam. Ashraf began his career as a house soloist with the Cairo Opera House. Is that correct? Is that the name of the opera house? Cairo Opera?
Yes,
All right.
Care Opera Company. Yep.
Where he also taught voice at the American University in Cairo, where he also served as music director for Disney Character Voice International, which we can get into. Some of his signature roles are Sparafucile and Rigoletto, Ramfis and Aida, Colline, La Boheme, Leporello and Don Giovanni, Basilio, Barbara Seville, Alidoro. It goes on and on and on. But he's also done some new works. Recently, you did the Queequeg and Moby Dick, the Jake Heggie,
Yeah.
13th Child, Danish production by
The
Paul,
13th Child,
yeah,
Reuter.
Paul Reuter.
Yeah.
Um,
It
and
actually received its world premiere in Santa Fe last summer.
oh wow, wow!
Yeah.
And you hold your bachelor's, master's, and doctorate degree from University of Colorado at Boulder.
I do, as well as a Bachelor in Architecture from Cairo University before that.
Okay, so basically, the Renaissance man, the Egyptian American amazingness that you are. Uh, we met in 2010. We've known each other for this
Yeah.
is our 10-year anniversary.
Yes,
We
it was
met,
Falstaff Seattle Opera.
yeah, Seattle Opera production of Falstaff with Peter Cazares directing and
Yes.
Ricardo Frizza was conducting.
Conducting.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
what an incredible cast. Peter Rose and Stephanie Blythe, and I have to say that was my first,
Stephanie Blythe.
as quickly, yeah, that was my first production of
Hmm.
Falstaff, and I was terrified, but I was so happy to have met you.
Yeah. Sally Wolf.
Oh yeah, Sally Wolf was one of the Alices, and
Yeah. Yes.
it was an amazing cast.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You rocked your aria every night and every rehearsal.
I
You
rocked
remember
it.
that? I remember that.
Well,
Yes, of course you did.
I was so terrified because I had just made my debut in that very season in the fall doing Germont, like Silvercast Germont.
Traviata.
Yeah, and then he
Mhm.
asked me to come back. Spate Jenkins asked me to come back because they lost their gold cast forward, and so I was like, sure, yeah, I'd love to. But I have to say that one of the
Spade
best.
always knew what was good for his company.
This is true. This is true. But I have to say, one of the best memories from that entire production was our friendship and getting to hang out with you. And you put me at such ease in a period of time where I was so stressed out and nervous about the show. So I've always appreciated that. So one
That's
of the
wonderful.
things,
Yeah, you've, yeah.
go ahead, go. Sorry, Ashraf is
No, I
in.
was about, we, no, we were about, I would say it's like we met over that awesome picnic they do at the beginning of the rehearsal process. And we
That's
just gorged on all the good food. And then we started talking vocal technique very quickly.
right.
And we had a lot of fun. Remember, we had a couple of lessons together. You taught me a couple of
Right.
lessons.
That's right. You were like, I love the way
Yeah,
you sing. Let's do a lesson together. And we started talking about. That's right.
yeah.
I had totally forgotten that. So that leads us right into the whole idea of my show, Under the Hood. Um, I would love to hear. Now, you did your entire education in one institution. Who was your main teacher? Did
Yes.
you study with the same teacher the whole time you were there? And what I'm really interested in knowing is that, well,
Mhm.
let's say this. When did you come to America from Egypt, and how was that for your education? And then while you were here studying in Boulder, what were initially some of the vocal issues or struggles that you faced in your bachelor's degree? And then how
Yes.
did studying with the same teacher the entirety of throughout your education, did you were you able to seamlessly kind of go from one thing into the next without, for me, for example, I had one teacher for my undergrad, then I had a different teacher for graduate school, then I had a different teacher for postgraduate, then I had a different teacher, and with each one of those, I sort of had my own struggles, but and
Yes.
each one was sort of able to help me figure out something from the previous. But what was your experience like?
Something different. My experience actually was pretty stable. My current teacher until today, Patrick Mason, is the one I had switched to towards my first 4 years in Boulder. I came in 1992. It was the first time I came to the States, especially to study there. And that was at the behest of my original Egypt teacher, Raouf Zaidan, who taught me for 4 years initially in Egypt. And then he's the one who said, if you ever do your academic work in music, you will go to Boulder, Colorado. So we actually came together for him to do a DMA, and I came with 70 credits worth of courses from my engineering degree. And I just only had to do the music courses. So I did a bachelor in 2 years and a master's in 2 years. I stayed here 92 to 96 and did 2 back-to-back degrees. I started with Bob Harrison. Robert Harrison was one of the pillars at CU for many years, and then he was stolen by IU for the rest of his teaching career. He's now retired. He was a lovely lyric tenor, encyclopedic knowledge, very intellectual, and we came to the school because it had this strong pedagogical presence. Burton Coffin, and then after him Barbara Dosher, are the ones who sort of morphed the new acoustics into what we know now as the whole vowel modification technique, or part of the technique. And everybody was on board. Almost everybody in the faculty at the time was on board with that. It was almost a religion at the time at the school. Barbara Dosher was the head of the voice department, and when Bob was on sabbatical, I studied with her for a spring and a summer. So that also a huge input into my technique. And then after 3 years, and I've done really good progress, but I was suffering from the typical young bass issues at the time. I was in my 20s, and you have all the fast vibrato. Sometimes you sing a little under because your resonators are not quite in tune yet. And then went to Patrick. He was a baritone, and he also had a lot of footprint in the recording arena and the performance arena. He was the most active performer at the time on the faculty. So I switched to him my second year of master's, and then stayed with him. Came back to do my doctorate from 2002 to 2008.
So you had 2 different teachers at Boulder, Robert Harrison and then Mason.
Yeah, largely yes, with a significant half-year stretch with Barbara Dosher, because she was the source of all that font of knowledge
She wrote the book
that we were learning then. She wrote the book, exactly, and until now, actually, I teach the book. So I'm quite familiar with it, and very often jump in for some teachers, to teach the formants chapter.
Right. So you mentioned you had a bit of a fast vibrato. How long?
Yes, as a young bass.
How long did that? No, were you aware of that while you were singing? Was that something like,
yes,
I know that I have this, I don't know how to fix it, and then you go and you was that something you were able to talk outwardly with your instructor and say, yeah, I've got this fast vibrato, and I don't know
Yes.
I don't know how to slow it down, or if that's even the thing, or how did you approach that?
Yeah, it was an interesting thing, actually. A couple of people who never really taught me were there was this soprano. Her name's Leslie Mannering. She was Colorado based when I went to the States teaching it in UNC Greeley, but she had a huge career in Europe as a Queen of the Night and Gilda for good 15 years. And then since she came back to have a teaching career in the States, she just said it's a matter of time. She said basses grow up last, they mature last. Just wait, keep doing the right thing, and it'll go away. And honestly, that's what happened.
So there wasn't really like an exercise or a series of exercises or things that you did to work on that. You just sort of you were patient with it, and over time, looking back on it, what do you think causes a fast vibrato in a singer's instrument, especially when they're young?
Yes, I actually, you broke up. I
Oh,
missed the
sorry.
whole question.
Sorry. I was asking, looking back,
Looking back,
and as a teacher now, how do you approach working with a young singer who might have a fluttery vibrato or a little too fast of a vibrato?
interestingly enough, later in my career, what I learned is that unless or until you get your breathing right, uh, so many things are not going to fall into place.
Right.
And at our school, we had kind of what I call now reactionary pedagogy. If you have bad heritage, like there's a cumulative heritage of bad support, people actually, there's kind of the generic answer from many teachers whenever there's a problem. It's like, have more support, have better breath, all that stuff.
Right.
And it results actually in too much air pressure
Yeah.
and and compressed sound. So my school had sort of that reactionary thing, and they decided not to talk about breathing at all. And for a while, I mean, now they do, and later they did also. Sort of when I came back to my doctorate, and they decided that sort of that heritage that results in everybody being obsessive about over engaging the abdominals to support the sound was, they're gonna erase it by not talking about it at all. And I thought that was a shortcoming in our in our school at the time in the 90s. But until I got my breath under control and I realized that actually big part of the support is to relax your abs rather than over engage them, that big part of your support is to maintain the posture that stabilizes your airflow versus air pressure ratio. You're not going to get your vibrato under control, because you could sing on the perfect vowels and your sound would still be wrong, until you solve the problem below that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I certainly think that in my teaching now, one of the
Mhm.
two primary things that I talk about are a
Mhm.
balance, whether that's a balance of chiaroscuro or a balance of, like you
Mhm.
say, air pressure with air speed, or the other thing is efficiency.
Yeah.
Making sure that you're efficient, whether that's, the gas mileage, with your breath,
Yeah.
or, making certain that, like you say, you use the things that you can with posture
Yeah.
and with stability. Um, but yeah, as soon as one thing starts to overpower the other, you lose that balance, and all of a sudden you start to rely too much on whatever it might be,
Yeah.
and you find yourself going off a different path.
Yeah. I mean, we did use a lot of raspberries, to loosen the tongue and actually simulate the adduction, but up there, because if you don't have the right air, your raspberry is not going to happen. It's not like a lip trill. A lip trill will always happen no matter what air you're using, but a raspberry won't happen until your air is right.
Talk a
And
little bit. Can
I,
you talk a little bit more about that? Because one of the things that I've recently found in my teaching is that when I ask the student, well, in my own singing, if I'm able to
yeah,
sing something on, if I'm able to do whatever with that
yeah,
raspberry,
mhm,
it's a very, very different, well, let's say this, it's a very similar sensation physically to what we do when we
yeah,
sing, but it's a very
yes.
different sensation than, if you just do a lip trill.
Yes, the raspberry, for me at least, if I do it and I go into the top and it's and the air is not right, and sort of the inner vowel or the backspace is not right, it just doesn't happen. It cracks or
It
stops.
pinches off, yeah.
Same for a bass baritone. If you don't relax the air enough and turn your vocal cords into kind of flag that's fluttering in a light breeze, the raspberry completely stops, and it stops happening. Then you realize, like, oh, I'm having too much air pressure, actually too much air in general.
You,
So they did address that through it, but we never talked about what's happening below. And what I needed personally is to let go of my abs, because I was that eager student who wanted to get things right. And when you're young and you're strong in your 20s, you engage your body a
yeah.
lot. and you're in a foreign country, you're on a student visa, you want to get that scholarship, because if you don't get the scholarship, you can't afford to actually pay for school, and you try hard, you actually try too hard sometimes.
Yeah.
And so that was one thing that changed once I figured out. And the other thing was the personal, sort of bringing your personal issues into your singing. I was in a tempestuous relationship, and very often in our lessons we use them as a therapy session. You start talking to your teacher about what happened at home and all that, and some teachers are happy to hear and help you and all that, but even though it's not particularly very healthy. Yeah, I mean, it's a balance. You have to be sympathetic, but you actually have to teach a lesson, and you have to get the kid to sing.
Yeah. I remember,
That's something that
I was going to say, I remember,
go ahead.
I won't name names, but a very well-known voice teacher who I studied with, at the beginning of your time with him, he makes it very clear and even says out loud, I need all of you to know that I don't need any of you in my studio. I'm perfectly happy with who I am without any of you. And so that you're aware, this will not be a codependent relationship. And of course, at the time, as a new student of it, I was
It's
like,
probably a scary thing.
I've always relied on my voice teacher to be like my confidant and who I kind of talk to. But I have to
And
say that
therapist, yeah.
there's power in that.
There is the other, I mean, that's why I said it's a balance. It's important that as an artist, you learn to draw on your personal experience to serve your music.
Yes.
If you have an eventful life, that's a treasure trove for interpretation. And that's, so that came later, of course. And I remember one of my first lessons with Patrick. I walked in and I started talking about something that happened at home, and he said, not that I'm not sympathetic. He said, you can tell me that over a beer. We're already friends, but I just want you to stand there and do what I tell you. And that freed me, actually, from that component of the relationship of, walking in and bringing all your problems and then using them as an excuse to, not to sing well in the lesson.
Right.
But once you have your technique in hand, then you can, in a very Stanislavski manner, draw on your experiences for interpretation. Because Patrick is also very much about true interpretation and true profound interpretation. He was about technique, and he was a wonderful interpreter of art song. And he was never that icicle who stands on stage and just delivers the notes and the words. But there was always a story, and there was always a presence that affected you and changed you often as an audience.
Wow. So you mentioned the two sort of initial issues with the fast vibrato and occasionally singing under the pitch. As you developed and went into your master's degree, I assume you were able to fix some things, but as it always happens, we make adjustments for certain things, and then new problems arise. So what other sort of issues? What other sort of issues did you start to face throughout your master's? So in your early 20s, I would guess.
Well, I started my bachelor late. Remember, I had a whole bachelor before that.
Oh,
so
right.
I started my bachelor when I was 25.
Oh, okay. So this would have been
So
your
I
late
went
20s for your master's.
Yeah. So I went into my master's when I was 27, shy of 27, and I finished shy of 29, 2 years.
Okay.
And my voice had grown. Actually, I think my first major role to sing at school was the first semester of my master's, fall of 94, and it was Mustafa.
Oh, in Italian.
In L'Italiana in Algeria. It was in English, but nevertheless, it's a demanding role. And here's the thing: when you come into the arena with a moderate-sized voice, a medium-sized voice, not a big-sized voice, you have size insecurity issues with all these star students around you who are ahead of you, and that's where you have to keep, I mean, in a school, you have to keep your wits about you and realize that as you optimize your voice, your size and your color grows and gets better. And so during my master's, there were these chat that can, I grew so much through Mustafa, for example. Then I had to do, I did Colline and I did secret police agent at the very end of my degree. And that was the biggest challenge
What was
because he has
Secret
this,
Police
he has
Agent?
in the console, Menotti's.
Right, Menotti, yeah.
Menotti's, the console, yeah. So that's a very hard aria to sing. And so those, you know, the second half of my stay in Boulder was just trial by fire, one after another. In terms of the operas, they produced 3 operas a year, and they still do. So it was trial by fire that just forced me to grow. And less than a year after I was back in Cairo, I got to do Don Pasquale, and that was sort of when I felt, oh, I'm becoming a singer I could pay a ticket to hear. When I heard some of the recordings, there was a tenor who came from UCLA on an exchange program. His name was Timothy Massard, and he did some master classes in Cairo, and sang for him. My voice was quite light. I mean, I'm a lyric bass, and at the time he said, after half an hour, he said, all there is to know about technique, Ashraf, you're just not using your voice. He said, you're singing too safely, or you're too afraid to hurt yourself.
And was that something that you had in the back of your mind? Like, I want to make
Yes.
sure that I don't oversing. I want to make sure that I don't push. I want to make sure I don't.
Yeah. You want to be in control. You want to be neat and tidy, so you don't ever let go. And that was the other sort of bit of, not necessarily technical, like detailed technical advice, but just use your voice. You have the tools, and that was the beginning of a new phase. And those 6 years back in Cairo, 96 to 2002, were huge growth years. I got very competitive, and I started singing major roles very quickly, and sort of made me ready for my doctorate and coming back to the States afterwards.
But then when you came back, did you studied again with
Patrick
Mason?
Yeah, I actually came back to the States for 2 full summers, and just to study with him for 3 months, 98 and in 2000. And I brought him over to Cairo for a few recitals and master classes. So I had my teacher also for a couple of good stretches during those 6 years.
I was going to say, if he hadn't heard you in 6 years after you finished your master's, and then heard you again in 6 years later, I wonder but he did have a chance to hear you a couple times.
But that's what happened when I went to audition for the school. I mean, the rest of the faculty heard me.
Yeah,
after 6 years of not hearing me.
And what were their? I mean, you tell us what in those 6 years were you? I mean, were you working with someone other than Patrick Mason to help you find what that really means to sing with your whole voice and not be so careful? Or what
not really.
Did
I started teaching, and that's actually it teaches you as a singer so much when you start teaching.
Yeah.
You become aware of a lot of stuff that you're not doing, or maybe doing wrong, or you could do better when you're teaching students, because you start asking them for it. Having said that, I firmly believe that you must study pedagogy, because teaching is a separate skill from singing. You have to have studied how to teach, and that's a problem with many singers who end up teaching without truly learning how to teach. And that's something I'm really thankful for having gone to CU Boulder, when it had a very strong pedagogy program, and we studied anatomy, physiology, acoustics, and we had a whole seminar or a whole semester on teaching. So we taught students and we got critique. So that was something I was grateful for my very first teacher in Cairo to have directed me to go to CU. Because when, as you learn and as you grow, you also sort of, I'm not saying outgrow the tradition that taught you, but you also create your own philosophy that, we learned so much about vowel modification and acoustics in general, because that was the forte of the school. But you start accumulating your toolbox as a teacher.
Right. And I think that the
So
teachers that taught us become the pillars on which we stand.
yeah,
Like you say,
yep,
you have to develop your own opinion about things, and those
yeah,
opinions might be based on, of course, your experiences
yeah,
with
yeah,
pedagogy and with the different techniques
yeah.
that you've learned over the years. But
Yeah, yeah, I mean, Raouf was a big proponent of old-fashioned teaching. So Marchesi, Lamperti,
Mhm.
Garcia. So after I was done with CU, I went and read Marchesi and Lamperti and Garcia, and then I realized that they were huge proponents of using cutting-edge science of their time, and that's why they were fabulous teachers. They actually utilized what they knew then, and that's kind of an issue I take with a lot of parts of our teaching culture today. And lots of people says, like, what was wrong before all the new science of the 20th century? They produced great singers, the old-fashioned way. But the old-fashioned way existentially was all about new science. So why aren't we using what's available to us today?
yeah, it's interesting. It is
So
interesting.
you're not actually, you're what you're worshiping, you're worshiping at the altar of old-fashionedness rather than at what these old-fashioned teachers advocated.
Right, right. Huh.
You're worshiping a false idol when you call for old-fashionedness.
So
We just, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so with all of that pedagogical background, and yet with a great deal of performing experience under your belt when you went back to do your doctorate,
Mhm.
what sort of things were you working on? How long did it take to do your doctorate to finish it? And then what sort of things were
Mhm.
you working on at that stage?
I when I arrived, I had a plan in my head. I came with the intention to eventually emigrate to the States, but I wanted to do that legally.
Yeah.
So what I did was I finished everything that needed me to be physically at school in 2 semesters, all the coursework, and did my comps third semester because I wanted to start building my career in the States while I was still officially a student as part of what after as part of something called curricular practical training. So in America, you're not allowed to work off campus, to take a job off campus when you're a foreign student,
Mm.
but you are allowed to take part-time jobs as part of your course of study
Well, that's
after
basically
the
what a gig
first,
is, right? Is a part-time
yeah,
job.
exactly, after the first year of study. So after that, I started working for Opera Colorado in compromissory roles, covering big ones under Peter Russell, and I was connected with some amazing artists. Elizabeth Futrall, she's actually the one who's introduced me to my first attempt at an agent. Brian Contes, who was with me in Traviata. He's the one who connected me to the person who became my first agent, and just the ball rolled from there. I never did the young artist thing because I was never eligible for it legally, and yeah, so I just went directly in my mid-30s into the audition arena, and I told the agent, Robert Gilder, first one, I'll just go and camp in New York for as long as you want me to, and get me every audition you can. And it started slowly but surely, with smaller companies, and then it got bigger pretty quickly. My audition for Spate, which was my first A house, was in 2006,
Okay.
fall of 2006. So
And you started, let's see, what year was
I
it that
had my
you
first
finished?
I had my agent first in 2004.
Okay, so just two
So
years after you started doing a
yeah,
number of auditions, you were
yep,
able to break out.
yep.
And Colline was your first role there, yes?
Yes, it was my debut there. Yeah, and it was supposedly gonna be done. I mean, I was thinking it this year, but it was canceled.
Oh, I
Full
know.
circle.
I know.
Yeah, I know. But here's the one thing that made a huge difference to the size of my marketable voice.
Yeah.
Um, I worked for a whole year with Patrick during my doctorate, during my first 2 years, on on Burton Coffin exercises from his book, the Overtones of Bel Canto. It's
Is
that
there a,
book that comes in with a
is there,
chart that you unfurl and you put
uh-huh.
it over the keyboard, and you have repetitions. That it's very complicated, but I distinctly remember I had sung with Opera Colorado 1 year earlier before we started that sort of course of exercises, Then I showed up to do a comprimario in Rigoletto, but at the time Monterone had not arrived. So in the music read-through, I sung Monterone, and it's just a hunk of singing for 5 minutes,
Yeah.
and I sang him, and then yeah. Yeah, and at the time, Jean Baril was the chorus master and on the music staff, and he looked at me. He's like, "What happened to you? Your voice pretty much doubled since I last heard you."
Wow.
And I thought, "Yep." So
How
those
would you
exercises, I
so
think,
how would
yeah,
you summarize what those exercises in the Burton Coffin book, what did they do for you?
they optimize the functionality of the adduction through doing the repetitions on ideal vowels for each repetition, ideal combination of vowels for each repetition,
And
and
can you break that
lots of
a little bit
singers.
further? Can you break that down a little bit further to say what were what vowels were you singing in different spaces in different areas of your range that you then
Believe it or not,
adjusted towards?
every repetition was a different combination of vowels, and that's why lots of singers and teachers find that very fussy and not worth the effort. And I personally, as a teacher, I have not had the chance of longevity or of a relationship with a student to actually try it on them because I perform all the time.
Right.
But it made a huge difference, and we haven't done it since that year,
Hmm.
funnily enough. But maybe when I'm right now in Egypt, but when I go back and sort of go camp with Patrick for a couple of months, and we could unfurl that chart again and see what we can do with it, what it would do with me at the age of 52 today.
Yeah. Interesting. That's
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah,
So once you started getting into a regular scheduled, gig after gig to the next gig and so forth, um,
yeah.
and had been singing for a few years, did you find yourself struggling with any particular technical issues once you got into heavier repertoire or into different situations, or was it because you had sort of, I mean, you kind of defy logic in that in you started your career and have had your career in America, and yet you did not do one of these bigger young artist training or even one of the apprentice
Nor
programs.
even started in Europe, like lots of
Yes,
singers start in Europe
exactly.
to be taken seriously in America.
Right.
Yeah.
You sort of are the one rose in the bushes that defied all the advice that people, essentially give. But once you did start getting going, as we say,
Hmm.
um,
Yeah.
did you ever find yourself in a situation where you were like, "Oh wow, I've got to rethink this."
The answer is always, because as it's a flesh and blood instrument. It is it's in constant growth and morphing, and it's being sculpted over and over again by the repertoire that we do. And I was lucky to get to do a lot of amazing repertoire. But case in point, a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, I got to do Monterone again,
Hmm.
and yeah, after having done Sparafucile, because now I'm reaching that age where you get those niche roles, and it was difficult. It
And you
was
sung
not,
it. So when you
I
when
had
you
sung it
when you stepped
had
in,
sung
or
it as
you
a 32-year-old bass,
right.
young bass, and now, yeah, and there's like it was completely reconfiguring, like you were driving, a sedan, and now you're driving a truck.
Hmm.
You're just singing it with a different voice. Old habits come back,
Right.
and or it's just sort of the insecurities, muscle memory, and the nice thing is, with having studied pedagogy, you have also the toolbox. You sort of switch into teacher mode and try to think, what would you tell your student to do about this problem?
If you were your student.
And you realize, yes, if I were my student, what do I tell them? Or him, and not or her, but in my case.
Hey, we can talk about pronouns.
But I switch into teacher mode, and then I start sort of taking it apart and then put it apart. The nice thing about knowing technique is that you don't need to have your teacher in your pocket all the time.
Well, I think that's the whole point of studying voice, right? Is to be able to learn how
Mm-hmm.
to solve your own vocal dilemmas. And
Yes.
once
Yeah.
you understand and have a toolbox of your own, you can
Yeah.
be out and be singing. And like you said, take a second to go into the practice room and be like, okay, what am I doing? This is what it feels like. Well, if I were my own student, what would I tell myself?
Yeah.
That's a really
And
cool.
you realize that we are always two people. We are always two people. As a singer, you're concerned about your presence and your staging and the sound that you're making and all that. And you start making developing bad habits, very much like a car on the road. You get scratches and dings and all that, and but you become your own garage as well if you know your voice well.
That's a good analogy. I haven't heard that one. I like that.
So yeah, and but also there is repertoire that built my voice and technique further. If I single out one role, it would be Alidoro. I was always in best vocal health after production of Cenerentola because of
Talk,
that damn aria,
I was going to say, talk a little bit about that. What do you think about the
La del Ciel.
yeah? What do you think about the ingredients of the Alidoro roll? Always keeps you in good health.
It's getting to a shape, to have what it takes to sing that aria from beginning to end and sing every note that's on the page.
Well, for people who
Is
might not know
it's
that aria, how would you describe the aria itself?
Okay. Alidoro was written during the revision a couple of years after the premiere of Cenerentola, when Rossini had time to actually write, and he had a singer that could sing it. It became the longest solo in the whole opera, and it's the scene with the accompagnato that Rossini wrote, because he usually doesn't write his recitatives. He wrote a big accompagnato. Is 10 minutes
Oh
of just
wow.
fireworks. It's Constanza. Yeah, it's Constanza for the bass. Martyr alla art for the bass,
Right.
pretty much.
Right.
So it's a stamina and technique and music and musicality package that it forces you to get to an amazing shape in order to be able to perform it and perform it well.
Well,
It's an E flat major,
yeah.
so you're hanging on E flats a lot. You're jumping on Fs a lot, and it's just page after page after page of fireworks, vocal fireworks that are not easy.
Wow.
So
Well, I'm
after
sure
that,
you
you
would.
suddenly you sound your my Verdi now sounds completely different because of Rossini.
Right, right. And I'm sure you would agree with this, but I mean, one of the things that I think that keeps my voice, I know it keeps my voice healthy, and I'm sure you agree with this for you as well, is maintaining agility. So even when you get into
Mm-hmm.
bigger repertoire, Verdi or
Yeah.
have you started singing any of the Alberich or any of the Wagner stuff?
No, haven't been asked. But yeah, a lot of people actually in auditions says like, you have Wagner in your future, but I was always a late bloomer.
Yeah.
Uh, I didn't come into the career here in the States until my mid 30s, and you know, hopefully I have the technique to last another 15
Right.
years.
Well, even with things like Monterone and bigger sung stuff, I think what
Mhm.
keeps that stuff sounding so powerful and fresh is making sure that we don't ignore things like Handel or Rossini or things that
And
keep
Rossini,
even Bach,
exactly.
the Bach oratorio stuff, that
Mhm.
keeps it florid and it keeps it moving.
Yes. I mean, I have two words for you, Gena Dimitrova. If if that freight train of a voice can sing Abigail dictation from her coloratura, that nobody has an excuse
Say,
not
say,
to sing coloratura.
say that name again. It kind of broke up.
Gena Gena Dimitrova.
Gena
Uh,
Dimitrova.
she's the Bulgarian dramatic soprano who was the Abigail
Yeah.
of the 80s and 90s. And if she sang every note on that score and you could take dictation from it, nobody has an excuse. I never buy it when somebody says my voice is too big to sing coloratura.
Right. Right. I have to say, I thought when I made my
I
debut
never buy it.
in the role of Nabucco, I thought that role was a bear, and then I got into rehearsals and I started looking at Abigail, and I was like, "Oh my God, what is that role about?"
and and you and you had a great one. Mary Elizabeth Williams is
Yeah, Mary
another
Elizabeth
huge
Williams
voice
and
that sings.
Raffaella, the other one was the soprano, the Italian soprano, Raffaella Coletti, I think her last name was. She was fantastic. They were,
Yes.
yeah. Again, They put together a good production.
Yeah.
Good team.
Yeah. And Mary Elizabeth has this Callas-esque intensity on stage
Very
as
much so.
well, on top of that amazing voice and technique.
Very much so. We also got to do Maria Stuarda together. She was the queen, and man, she talk about beast on stage that can just tear up the scenery, and she was
Yeah,
so incredibly powerful.
yeah,
I should.
yeah. I did an Aida with her. The only time we worked together uh, in Virginia Opera. Again, the repetition of that production was going to happen this March, and it got canceled.
Uh,
But yeah, I did the first iteration of it with her 10 years ago, and she was something to behold. I mean, voice like that can sing pianissimi like that,
it's amazing.
you know.
It's amazing.
Yeah, there's no excuse, honestly, for anybody to say my voice is too big to sing pianissimi or my voice is too big to sing coloratura.
I agree. I
Yeah,
agree.
it's medicine.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
is.
Carol Vaness also once said, she said, I sing, since I started singing the heavies, Toscas and butterflies and all that, she said, I always go back to Mozart and Rossini. They are my litmus test of vocal health.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned some things getting canceled. I mean, we're all sort of right now in the same game. I mean, I woke
Can
up
barely
today.
breathe.
I literally woke up today. Lyric Opera of Kansas City has has canceled their production of La
The
Traviata.
fall. The fall.
Yeah, the fall. And
I'm really sorry.
oh well, it was expected, but it's just every time it happens, it's just like another little, whew, you know.
Yeah.
Um,
I was going to have the big debut. We're not mentioning the name of the house.
that's right.
We
That's right.
can't
That's
by
right.
contract,
So, but
but we can't by contract. But I
I
was
will
going to have
say,
the big one, and
what have you been
it
doing
got canceled.
what have you been doing to stay busy and to keep yourself in good vocal health, but to also keep yourself in good mental health during these times when we're sort of all wondering what's next?
I plunged into a terrible depression the first month and a half of uh, of the COVID lockdown. I was at home in San Francisco, and I tried to sort of force myself into a regimen of practicing and singing arias, and I did that maybe 10 times in a month and a half, which is very few, way too few.
Yeah.
And then what whipped me back into shape was family responsibility. I had to fly to Egypt to look after my mom and my sister, and we had some health crisis here, and we didn't have any caregivers because of the pandemic.
Hmm.
So I just came in, and it actually, funnily enough, even though it was the health crisis, it put me in a better mood. It's sort of, once you start doing something real, something that you're responsible for,
Yeah.
I felt better, a lot better about myself, and I started having some activity. I recorded some Enchanted Evening with a pianist friend of mine who's in New York, and I recorded it here in Cairo. Tomorrow, I'm about to record actually a voiceover for a new video game, and I pitched a visiting professorship at the American University in Cairo because I want to teach pedagogy there. We don't have, anybody teaching teachers how to teach
Wow.
in Egypt.
So you
We
briefly you mentioned doing a voiceover for a video game. We can't have an interview with Ashraf without a little Mickey Mouse. So I mentioned that you were the music director. We mentioned that you were the music director of the what was it called? The Disney Character Voice International.
International. Yeah, that was the operation, the dubbing operation of Disney. And they have 20 odd operations. They dub into 20 odd languages around the world.
So you would
Arabic was a huge market.
yeah.
And when I came back from the States in 1996, here's where pedagogy actually comes into play. Funnily enough, I came back from the States in '96, and a whole bunch of my friends who were in theater that I used to train with and do movement workshops with before I traveled, they were all in the Disney business, all of them.
Wow.
And they called on me to be one of the music directors. So, you'd be responsible for making sure the translation fits the music. You train the actors. If the actors couldn't sing their way out of a paper bag, then you find voice matches, and then you direct the recording sessions. So one morning, my friend Aisha, who was the creative director of Disney in Cairo, she called me and she said, like, Ashraf, where is the lower end of the male falsetto? 7 in the morning. She was so frustrated. I was like, you're talking to a singer. You woke me up at 7.
Like,
I
what?
said, get into, like, yeah. She said, yeah. She said, get out of your nightgown and just like come and have coffee with me. And I go and have coffee with her, and she hands me the creative letter for Mickey. And she said, we've had 16 people audition who could not produce the voice. Now, I have to say this now. I have never heard Mickey's voice because Egypt's TV was Warner Brothers contract, not Disney. So we never had Mickey Mouse on our television. We had Tom and Jerry and
Wow.
and Bugs Bunny and all that. So I
Okay.
didn't know what Mickey sounded like, but the creative letter said Mickey's voice is produced at the lower end of the male falsetto. And I told her, well, this is the chest voice, this is the falsetto, and as you go down to be into the chest voice, this is the lower end of the male falsetto. And like she had that look on her eyes. It's like, that's it. You know, kind of like Olympia
That's
Dukakis
what.
in Moonstruck. It's like, that's it. And she popped in the VHS casting tape and she said, read with this. So I read, and it's like sort of just 2 minutes of, you know, all the key Mickey phrases, you know, oh boy, Flora, you want to get the paper? You know, Mortimer, leave her right now. And all this screaming. And you sing, bigger is better, but all that in Arabic.
Oh
And
wow.
she called the studio, booked a session. We recorded the audition. She sent it to Burbank, and a week later, I was Mickey.
Wow. That is you. I've never actually heard you do that. I'm like crying. That sounds so amazing. That's unbelievable. So now, wait. But I have listened to because in
Mhm.
addition to Mickey, you also did Ursula.
Ursula. Well, that was one of the cases of singers who couldn't sing their way out of a paper bag.
Aha. This is
This
Little Mermaid,
we had
the first Little Mermaid.
Little Mermaid. So I was the music director for Little Mermaid, and we had this incredible actress, one of Egypt's best actresses, and she just could not match pitch. She had no pitch intelligibility. And so it was hit and miss. And, you know, the producers at the time didn't know much about coaching singing and all that. And they kept saying, like, you just don't want, you know, you're being lazy. You don't want to rehearse her enough and all that. It's like, we've rehearsed for days and days.
Yeah.
We're going to need a voice match. So it takes us 3 days of recording to record a 3-minute song.
Wow. With her.
Just hit and miss, and you splice it together. Yeah, with her, because they insisted that she had to sing. And, you know, here I am knowing what was going to happen anyway. And sort of you splice it note by note and using autotune and all that stuff. And then at the time, Mac OS was 9, was not 10. And it was, if you remember, it was a very unstable platform at the time. The entire session crashes and we lose all it takes. And I told them, watch it. We spent 3 days singing this. It's going to be exactly the same. And it took 3 more days to record the song.
Wow.
So anyway, and at the end, when we finished, I told them, this is not a performance. It's going to go to Burbank and they're going to say, find a voice match.
Yeah.
And this is exactly what the letter said. So here I am recording a guide for possible candidates for Ursula. And I'm just, you know, using, you know, sort of trying to match the original sound and all that. And again, it was another that's it moment from Aisha. And she says, you sound so much like her, just a little bit too much like a man. So I asked the sound engineer to slow the tape. And at the time we were recording on a physical tape, not right on the computer.
Right.
It was a digital tape, but it was physical tape. Slow the machine just enough to take it down semitone.
Yes.
So instead of an A minor, it was a G sharp minor, Poor Unfortunate Souls. I sang. And it was 102-degree fever that day. Finished the song in 2 takes, literally 15 minutes. And then I told him, now play it back at regular speed. And it was her.
Wow. Wow.
And it was her. So she said, I'm going to send that to them without telling them who's singing. And they thought that the actress suddenly was touched by God and was able to sing.
It's amazing.
And then she called him and she said, no, it's Mickey, actually, who's singing. It's our Mickey who's singing. And it's like, yeah.
Wow.
So Poor Unfortunate Souls is actually somewhere on YouTube if you search Poor Unfortunate Souls Arabic.
Yeah,
I think the first thing that comes up.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Well, Ashraf,
Yeah,
I cannot tell you how much I appreciate you taking your time and being over in Cairo right now and making this work with the time difference and everything. And uh, again, it's just great to see you and to talk with you. And
it's so good to see you. We haven't spent any time together. You know, we wait for the audition season to hang out in New York
I
between
know
auditions, and
now there's
it's been
none. So
forever, man.
I know.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again. I really appreciate
Thank
it.
you for having me.
Yeah, I'm sure that people are gonna love this. So let's stop the recording.